Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. This video is part of an ongoing series on Agile software design. In these videos I'm discussing how design relates to Agile software development practices. In this video I want to cover when design is appropriate and therefore when it may not be. In video 3 in the series, we discussed that there are really two types of technical design. There's upfront design and then per task design. Upfront design applies when we're creating a new solution or perhaps a new application as part of an existing solution, where that application is intended to have any form of longevity. What we're doing here is we're selecting our architecture, our starting point for what we need to build. We may also spend some time trying to identify some key components that may become part of the system at a later date. However, we will not be designing those key components at this stage. We will only design what we're starting with. The list of key components is intended to act as a roadmap for the future to guide us in the direction we may intend to go. However, it's not set in stone and it may change. It's hard to say how much design needs to be done up front, but it's perhaps measured in days. It may sometimes be as much as a sprint. It's really just enough for the team to share the knowledge of the majority of basic decisions to aid their efficiency at the start of the sprint. For a new technology or architecture, there may be benefit in doing enough per task design for a few tasks as well. That may help ease the team in something that they're starting afresh. At my previous company, when we built our second Blazor site, it was done by a different team than the first Blazor site that we created. Development came upon us a bit unexpectedly and we were asked to start before we were quite ready. I did a technology demonstration and training session for the team to show them how to use Blazor, how it works, and the sort of architecture that we'd be using. But I didn't quite have time to do the upfront design that would have helped them. We started into the tasks, but unfortunately the first couple of sprints didn't go very well. The developers found it quite frustrating that they were having to struggle with a new technology as well as the design decisions about how to use that technology all at the same time. And so we decided to stop development, and the lead developer of the team spent a bit of time reworking the code and restructuring it so that it was more consistent and more as we'd originally intended. And then we were able to bring the other developers back in, do a bit more design, and then continue from there. And things went much better from that point on because people were more understanding of the structure that we'd intended from the outset. So on to per task design. Well, per task design is intended to be small and often, small incremental bits of design. This is how it's evolutionary in its nature. We're just trying to do enough design to carry out a single task or perhaps occasionally a couple of tasks. Now remember that the key drivers for design are that we want to structure our application in such a way that we can continue to work with it efficiently in the future. We're also going to consider at the design stage whether there's any risk being introduced by the change that we're making. And with DesiGen, my custom tool, if that's the tool of choice for doing design, then there's a third factor that may help determine whether design is applicable, and that's whether you can generate some of the code that you need for the task in hand. Remember with the risk-based part of the decision making that we should probably be slightly overly cautious. Make sure that you do design even if a task might be risky, but you're not sure. Design is likely to be applicable to all significant production code in a system with any longevity. So if we're adding any significant amount of code, then design is likely to be applicable. Probably the best place to start is by assuming that design is likely appropriate for the task that you're working on. and then consider whether any of the following exclusions apply. Firstly, bug fixes. Bug fixes are not something we would generally add a significant amount of code for, and they are really intended to make the code do what we originally expected it to do in the first place. And as such, there's unlikely to be any significant change or significant risk. So bug fixes generally won't have any design associated with them. If we're doing textual or content changes, then they are unlikely to require any form of design. There's nothing risky there, most likely. And if we're making styling changes, then they are also unlikely to have per task design. Now with styling, you do want a general overarching design of how you're grouping your styling together and how you're applying styling. But that's different from doing per task design on styling. The next thing to talk about is proof of concepts. Sometimes we need to put some code together just to understand the technique or technology we're about to use if we've not used it before. If we're using a new API, a new component, a new part of a framework that we've not used before, then putting some code together just to understand how it works and how we might best use it may be applicable. That's a proof of concept. Proof of concepts are generally learning experiences, and they are especially applicable to new technology, either for the team as a whole or for an individual. What we should remember is that we should create proof of concepts as fast as we can with the minimal amount of code possible. They're not intended to be production ready, and as such we don't need to worry about how we structure the code at that point in time, because what we should do with a proof of concept generally is we should throw it away. We should be careful that once we've done our proof of concept that we go back to doing a design. Proof of concepts come before design really. They help us work out what our design will be. We should be mindful not to imagine that everything is going to be a proof of concept. It's an easy thing to slip into if you do a proof of concept and it's kind of good fun to put some code together like that. Then it's easy to say, oh, well, that was fun enough and it was efficient enough that that's the best way to move forward. But you've got to be careful not to get off on the wrong foot, especially with a new piece of technology. Make sure you're not shortchanging the company, and be careful to plan for the future. That's what our design does, and so that's why it's valuable. Be professional, make sure that you're delivering both the short-term goals but also long-term value. Remember too that if you're using Decigen, our tool, if you have templates that help, then maybe even parts of proof of concept can be generated using a design style approach. But generally proof of concepts are something that you haven't done before and therefore you're unlikely to have templates for. And as a result, it's less likely that that will be helpful. Now the next thing to talk about is startups. The decision-making process of whether to do design may be different for startups if they have no income. If a company needs to move as quickly as it possibly can, because the company may not survive if they have nothing that's generating income, then it's possible that in the early days that just throwing a bit of code together without really worrying about any form of structure, naming conventions or coding conventions may be appropriate. But it is worth realizing that that is a trade-off. Make sure you discuss that trade-off with the team and with the management. There are short-term benefits from that, but there's a cost in the long term in that you will find that what you've built won't survive the test of time. Remember too that as soon as the software is making an income, then it has value, and that value needs protecting. And it's making sure that it's well structured that achieves that protection. Remember that nobody is a startup forever. As soon as code has gone live and there is enough of an income, then you should switch your mentality away from being a startup. Building for the short term is not strategic, and you are shortchanging the company if you allow yourself to believe that you should be a startup long term. If the company continues to say that they want to use the startup approach, then consider whether that company has a future. The final category where design may not apply and spending time on worrying about structure and naming and coding standards may not be relevant is if you're creating short-term or tactical software. An example of that is the events industry. I did work in the events industry some years ago, and sometimes it was appropriate that if there was a one-off event that we would create some code for that event and then throw it away afterwards. Of course, there is always the danger that that one-off event becomes a regular event. That is a danger of that approach. Just be mindful of that. And also bear in mind that the number of customers you will have who can afford to pay for custom solutions built from scratch is going to be an ever-shrinking market. Increasingly, there will be people that build products that cater for events, and they will win over in terms of cost over custom solutions. So in summary, upfront design applies to new solutions where we think that solution has some longevity. And we're going to make some basic decisions, create a few diagrams, and help guide the team as we start something afresh. Per task design is what we will encounter more frequently. This is where we should probably assume that design is appropriate most of the time, and then only not do design if some of the exceptions that we've talked about apply. Sometimes it is appropriate to bypass design, but not all that commonly. It's about the longevity of the solution that we're building. It's important that we're professional. Remember that developers don't like working with cowboys, and we need to be building something for the future of the company. Even if design is less fun than throwing some code together in the short term, that doesn't mean that design is not the correct approach. Now, there's a companion website for this video series. You can go to getdesigning.notstandard.com, where there's more information on design. You'll also find a link there to the docs site for the DesiGen design and generation tool, from where you can download the tool and try it for yourself. So that's it for this episode. In the next episode, I want to cover what other people are saying about design. I want to give you some links to references, other articles about what other thought leaders are saying about design. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join me again soon.